My name is Dorothy. This morning, under the dome of the State House in Boston, I had just finished a speech about the community clinic network I had built over many years. The camera lights burned hot, the hall rose to its feet applauding. Then a court officer stepped forward and produced an arrest warrant for fund fraud. In the front row, my husband, Bennett, hovered behind Dr. Helena Marlowe, the board chair, wearing a flawless look of pity. At home, my daughter Eva was watching live. I drew a breath and whispered into the lapel mic, "Lee, open the green file." My heart clenched. My mind went cold and clear. If they chose to humiliate me in public, I would let the truth walk out right here. If it were you, called by name and handcuffed under the lights, what would you do? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel to follow along. When I was 16, my father, Arthur, vanished like a strip of smoke. No instructions, no letter. Only a pair of high boots with torn heels, leaving blotched snow prints across the wooden porch. My mother sat for a long time at the kitchen table, her hand resting on the old receiver she still used at the town clinic. She didn't wail. She spoke slowly, as if assigning me a lifelong job. Healing is a vow, not a miracle. If you've chosen to keep your word, you must endure the long winter. A year later, she left too. In the cardboard box beside the bed, beyond a few photographs, there was only the stethoscope and a half-written note. When you see someone weakened, place this on their chest, to remember you are listening to a heart, not a number. I took the stethoscope to Boston with a scholarship just enough to cover the dorm, 2 extra changes of clothes, and a naive belief that hard work could make up for the lack. Class by day, wiped tables at a diner at night. That first summer, I signed up to take shifts at a community clinic in Roxbury. Patients lined up before the air had a chance to warm, only to ask what seemed like simple questions. When to take this medicine, where to file the paperwork to be seen, whether their child's vaccinations were on schedule. On graduation day, I didn't want to leave those scuffed plastic chairs. Something in the smell of antiseptic, the rustle of papers, an elderly hand tugging a child's sleeve, made my mother's instruction flare clear. I asked to stay full-time. 2 years later, after scraping together enough money and courage, I rented a small space in Dorchester. 12 blue plastic chairs, 1 intake desk, 2 exam rooms half the size of a bedroom. I painted the wooden sign Harbor North, myself, the letters wobbly. Even so, the morning it went up, an elderly woman stopped to read, smiled, and pushed the door open. On the first day, it was just me and Alma, a Puerto Rican nurse, quick-handed and warm-voiced. We spent weekends hauling shelves, painting walls, fixing wiring. The second-hand blood pressure monitor was scuffed but true. I learned to write grants at night, forms as long as oaths. Needles, gauze, bandages, minutes of nutrition counseling, the percentage of uninsured patients. I typed until my hands went numb, tying each budget line to a specific story. The plumber newly diagnosed with diabetes, the young mother who needed a vaccination schedule for her child but didn't yet speak English well. When that first grant was approved, I didn't have time to celebrate. I kept the intake lights on late and called each person to book an appointment. That fall, we signed an affiliation agreement with a teaching hospital. Residents rotated into the community. Patients were examined more thoroughly. We had more medications, more gauze, a few more chairs with backrests. I met Bennett at a hospital management conference. He smiled easily, asked with enthusiasm about the sliding fee model, and took notes as if everything I did was worth studying. In the evenings, we walked along the Charles and talked about turning a small clinic into a network, about pulling academia closer to low-income neighborhoods. "I believe you can do it," he said. Back then, having someone believe in me was enough to push a heavy door open. A simple wedding at a red brick church. We moved into an apartment overlooking a park. My mother's stethoscope hung in a glass frame by the door so that every time I left or came home, I remembered where I had begun. Then Eva was born. Love that needed no explanation. She slept with a finger in her mouth, hair soft, the corners of her lips twitching each time she dreamed. In the evenings, Alma showed me how to hold her properly. Hold her firmly but don't squeeze. I wore the baby carrier to the office. Left arm cradling my child, right hand signing forms. Between 2 appointments I pumped in the staff break room. The work was grueling, but I never felt miserable. When someone came into the waiting room with wary eyes and left with a clear treatment plan and a date for the following week, the fatigue dissolved on its own. The network grew out of small things. replacing plastic chairs with chairs that had backs, adding a children's bookshelf, contracting for Spanish and Cape Verdean Creole interpretation, setting aside a Thursday evening for a nutrition education group. I learned to read contracts like a junior attorney, to negotiate drug prices like a wholesaler, to laugh when turned down and come back the next month with a better proposal. I can't count how many nights I sat in front of an Excel audit sheet, fixing each CPT code so a claim wouldn't be rejected. When we opened a second site in East Boston and then a third in Roxbury, I hired more family physicians, nutritionists, and community health workers. I deliberately kept one rule at the door: no one is turned away for lack of insurance. A wooden placard with that sentence hung right at the entrance. Bennett entered a health administration graduate program. I helped pay the tuition as we had agreed. Now and then there were a few credit card bills from before we married, a couple of "can you cover this so it doesn't go late" items. I didn't count then. In my head, that was how a team worked. Even so, little late payment texts started popping up more often. I told him to send everything over so I could reorganize it. On weekends, we cleaned up the household books and the clinic books. Things held. For the moment. At Harbor North, patients' stories stitched themselves into a patchwork quilt. Rosa brought a basket of apples to thank us for helping reorganize her medications. Mr. Thomas, a truck driver, hunched shyly to ask for a glucose check schedule. Little Naomi came down with ear infections each season, and her mother always arrived 15 minutes early for fear of missing the bus. At home, we ate dinner together less and less. One of us had a meeting, the other was on call. A quick kiss at the door in the morning, a note on the fridge at night. My mother-in-law called a few times, her voice complaining, "Daughter, work too much and the family comes apart. I can keep the clinic in the house. Men need respect." I answered, "Patients do too." The call ended in a pocket of silence. The clinic network forced me to learn more. Data management, medical record security, infection control protocols. I joined a chronic disease research group to design interventions for low-income neighborhoods, took interns, taught a small class on clinical communication. I didn't make a habit of cocktail parties and I didn't know the names of the major donors. I knew the names of the people who lined up at 5:30 a.m. with a creased referral letter in a coat pocket. If anyone asked what success meant, I thought of the final moment of the day, looking at a row of empty chairs, the sealed sharps container, the soft yellow of the hallway lights. One more day in which someone worried less. But the system doesn't run on good intentions. It runs on meticulous ledgers, hundreds of insurance calls, and a string of meaningless characters in a software field that, if you mistype one box, gets the entire file denied. Some nights I stood in the kitchen back against the wall, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands, my mind still scanning the list of claim pending. I didn't complain. I chose this road and my mother's vow was warm enough to get me through cold months. At home, there were times I asked to reconcile our joint account so I could prepare tax documentation for a new grant. He said he'd check and send it. I waited. A week, then two. When I received a stack of printouts with a few lines blacked out, versions sent to a funder, he said, I felt something slip off kilter. A home isn't a project. I pushed the irritation aside because there was a morning meeting. I consoled myself, tired people work sloppily, sleep and we'll sort it out. One evening, Eva tugged my sleeve. Will you sit and listen to me practice one more time? I closed the laptop and sat. The bow rose. Music opened like a door in my chest. The day's burdens lightened. Only my child, the instrument, and steady breathing remained. When she finished, she asked, Do you think this piece is sad? I answered, Sad but bright. She laughed. Like you. I laughed with her. Maybe it was true, the kind of sadness that knows its way back to the place it chooses. On Monday morning, the mail carrier knocked on the intake room door in Dorchester and held out a thick sealed envelope. The upper left corner read, Office of the Attorney General, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Alma's hand froze over the stack of appointment slips. She looked at me, questioning. I signed, pulled up a chair and set the envelope on the stainless steel table, cold as a winter lake. As the letter opener slid along the flap, my breath went thin. Inside was a notice acknowledging receipt of an anonymous complaint, alleging that Harbor North had transferred real estate assets to a shell company to evade charitable fund restrictions. There was an attached asset list with several items circled in red. Exactly our 3 sites, the type neatly uniform. Please provide an explanation within 10 business days. Alma set her hand lightly on the edge of the table. Doctor. I looked up, smiled to reassure her, then folded the notice and slipped it into a folder. I'll send a written explanation. Don't let anyone wait too long today. The words came out easier than I expected. But when I turned into the small back room, I sat down beside the stethoscope in my pocket and listened to my own heart pounding like shoes running across ice. At noon, I called the board of directors' office to request an emergency meeting. Helena Marlowe's assistant picked up, her voice composed. We've just received the information as well. 6 p.m. tonight in the hospital conference room. Will that work? I said it would. While waiting, I went back through the books. 3 sites, all titled to Harbor North Community Health LLC, a community benefit entity registered and audited annually. There was no shell company at all. The only question mark was an asset adjustment. I had sent the bank last month to restructure the loan for a new ultrasound machine. I signed it myself and the auditor approved it. If someone wanted to turn paperwork into a weapon, they needed only a sentence plucked out of context. That evening, the glass-walled conference room looked down on a hospital parking lot slick with rain. Board members sat in a curve, water bottles and paper packets in front of them. Helena arrived last, a charcoal coat, a gray wool scarf, her eyes on me the way a surgeon studies an incision. So professional it was impossible to read good or bad. She nodded. Dorothy, we're all stunned. But we have to handle this thoroughly. I presented briefly. Legal documents, audit reports, grant cash flow, contracts awaiting disbursement. I spoke slowly so not a word slipped away from what I meant. At the end, a young board member in a white shirt buttoned to the neck nudged the microphone. We received a recording of a phone call. Please listen. He pressed play. Over the speaker it was my voice, or something very like my voice, dry and cold, telling a counterpart, sign it. If you don't expect a rotation slot in the area I oversee. After this week I can hardly guarantee skipping the process any longer. A man's voice on the other end lowered in appeasement. Hale, I just need 2 more days. My voice on the tape cut him off. You have 2 hours. Around the table a few people looked down, pens tapping softly. Heat climbed my spine. I said, play the beginning again. They did. This time I didn't listen to the words. I listened to the silence. Splices thin as paper. Breaths missing a beat. A background hiss as if from a tiled room with acoustics unlike my office. Each time I, on the tape, hit the word sign, the waveform dropped abruptly as if someone had jammed a syllable into a place it didn't belong. Helena looked at me. What do you want to say? If this is evidence, it's fabricated. At the very least, it's been edited. An older member sighed. Dorothy, you understand this is a crisis period. The public won't wait for a technical analysis. Our patients deserve to wait for the truth. The meeting ended late. As people shuffled out, Helena placed a hand on the stack of papers, her voice measured. They'll escalate the media push. Put patient protection first. The rest will need more than paperwork. I nodded slightly, neither believing nor denying. At home, the kitchen lights were warm and yellow. Bennett sat at the table, a bowl of cold noodles in front of him. He looked up, his expression already set in a practiced sympathy. I heard, I'm sorry for you. I opened the cupboard for a glass, poured water, the smell of hand sanitizer still clinging to my wrists. They have a recording. I know. Fortunately, Frank Miller reached out. A major funder. I heard he wants to sponsor Harbor North, to shield you from the heat for now. Frank who? Bennett put down his spoon, relieved to have something to show off. Frank Miller. A new philanthropic fund in Boston. He's aggressive about community health. He wants to meet you this weekend. Who introduced him? A friend at the hospital, he said, avoiding my eyes. We have to manage the crisis. I thought of the notice, of my voice on the tape, the voice of a stranger wearing my clothes. Bennett paused as if remembering. Dorothy, maybe take a few weeks off? I told you you're overloaded. People are starting to worry about your mental health. Who are people? He sidestepped. Just generally. I'm afraid you'll collapse at the boiling point. I rinsed the glass, let the water run like rain. White suds slipped into the drain. A small stab crossed my heart, not from fatigue but from a premonition. My mother once warned, when the ice is thin, Walk slowly and listen for the creak. 2 days later, in the middle of clinic hours in East Boston, a man in a brown coat with a stiff collar introduced himself as a court process server. He handed me a thick packet, petition for temporary guardianship. The first page listed the petitioner, Bennett Cross. The summarized grounds: symptoms of debilitation, impaired judgment, conduct endangering the organization and family assets. Attached was an affidavit by a close relative, describing my prolonged insomnia, work addiction, emotional outbursts towards staff. At the end, he asked the court to grant Bennett temporary full authority over financial decisions, including Harbor North accounts, and for the benefit of the minor, Eva Cross. Alma saw my face go pale and pulled up a chair. "Sit, I'll get you water." I shook my head, braced a hand on the table edge to stay upright. The man's hand had the smell of stale rain and cigarettes. I thanked him, waited for the door to close, then opened the file again. Part of it was a printout of text messages, a few fragments cut from nights I paged Alma for urgent coverage, a couple of emails where I replied sharply because a vendor shorted us on syringes. There, they had chosen the moments when I was most tired and set them beside the word debilitation, like sticking a label to my forehead. That evening, I called Bennett to the park near our home, where stone benches faced the water. He was half an hour late, wearing a fine coat and a new cologne. "This is what you call caring for me?" He lifted a hand in a practiced soothing gesture. "Don't misunderstand. Guardianship is only temporary. I want to protect you from rash decisions during a crisis. And protect Eva." "Protect Eva from her mother?" "You're exhausted, Dorothy. Can't you see? If you cared about me, you'd ask what I needed. You wouldn't file to have the court bar me from touching my child's accounts." He frowned. "The attorney said it's the right procedure." "Which attorney?" I asked quietly. He dodged. "The name doesn't matter. What matters is it will all be fine." I looked down at his shoes and remembered my father's old pair. A way of walking around cracked ice, stepping where most people step without asking whether the layer can bear more weight. On the 5th day after receiving the AG's notice, an email hit Harbor North's shared inbox, from Frank Miller. He introduced himself, said he had long followed our work, was heartbroken by baseless accusations, and stood ready to provide bridge funding to stabilize operations and reframe the brand in the public eye. He included a link to an article praising his foundation's projects in the Midwest. I read the email twice and smelled something too glossy, like fresh paint that hadn't dried. We met Frank in a conference room overlooking the seaport. He was a little over 50, hair gone silver at the right time, a well-practiced smile, a firm handshake. On his left wrist was a vintage watch with a blue steel sheen. Without glancing at documents, he rattled off what his fund could do: media shielding, recruiting an interim director of transformation, establishing a management trust for real estate assets, to avoid misinterpretation of purpose. He said the word protect a lot. "Who referred you to us?" He smiled and brushed the air as if erasing chalk. "Small community dear. Hail. Good news travels fast. I like people who do real work. And I can't stand seeing a community initiative destroyed by political games." There was a moment when he laughed at an aside. The laugh pinged off the glass and broke into small shards in my head. A very old metallic timbre echoing back from a cold wooden porch and a pair of boots with torn heels left behind in a snowstorm. I pressed my palms together to quiet the shiver. As the meeting ended, Frank stood, set a hand on the chair back, and concluded, "We'll draft a detailed proposal. Reputational damage can be repaired. As long as everyone agrees to place the assets into a professional management mechanism so there's nothing to argue about." I smiled politely. "Thank you." The words transfer and assets stood too close together, like opposite magnets pulling every other question into the space between them. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and spread the papers like a small battlefield. The AG's notice, the board meeting memo, the bloodless recording, the guardianship packet with a pink stamp, Frank Miller's email printed on white paper. Eva came home from her lesson, set her cello by the chair, poured milk, and watched me for a long time. "Mom." I looked up. I heard them talking at school, the mothers gossiping. "Harbor North is in trouble. Are you okay?" "I'm okay. Some people don't like how I work. They want me to stop. But do you know what can't stop?" She shook her head. "The heart." I placed my hand on her chest and smiled softly. It keeps working no matter how loud it is outside. She exhaled, her eyes softening. I don't like those people. Don't hate anyone. Hate tires the heart. Let's save our strength for other things, okay? She hugged me tight, the plastic smell of the cello case mixing with the scent of her hair after practice. That night, I opened the recording on the computer, plugged in headphones, and scrubbed back and forth. I didn't listen to the words. I listened to the dark spaces between them. There were silences longer than a natural breath. A faint high-frequency hiss like a heavy glass door pushed fast and then stopped short. A soft mic pop from a sealed room spliced into a hurried line from an open space. If this were real, it was too perfect to be human, and too sloppy to be the truth. I called Alma, told her to prioritize elderly patients tomorrow and move the meeting with the syringe vendor to the weekend. I wrote a list of asset transfers over the past 12 months, marking places that could be misread. I emailed Helena. I need a private meeting, just you and me. No assistant. Outside the window, Boston was damp and cold. On the sill, the thyme I'd planted last season had put out new leaves. Small, but the fragrance held. I brushed them lightly, the thyme scent rising, summoning a faraway wood stove. I filed the papers neatly into a folder. The things laid out before me, the AG notice, the recording, the guardianship petition, the savior funder, all had their own language, the cold edge of paper. I still had the language of the clinic, the warmth of a hand, the steady knock of a heart. I knew that from here on I would have to walk slowly on thin ice, and listen closely to each creak underfoot. The special board meeting began at exactly 7 p.m., the glass room looking out on a rain-wet lot. On the table lay a stack of files in neutral-colored plastic binders, as if swapping their order alone could turn right into wrong. Helena presided, her voice still warm and unhurried, but her phrasing filed down by counsel until there was nothing to grip. In this sensitive period, to protect the organization and our patients, the board has decided to temporarily suspend Dorothy Hale from the position of chief executive until the investigation concludes. I nodded, set my access badge beside the mic, and said only one sentence. Let no patients miss their appointments tomorrow morning. Leaving the room, I walked the corridor that smelled of antiseptic. A stainless cart sat quiet by the wall, an open box of gloves on its tray. I stopped by the on-call room, texted Alma to move the most vulnerable cases to the first slots, added, if anyone asks, say I'm still working. She nodded hard. I'm here. The phone began ringing as soon as I stepped into the lot. First, a small donor. We're forced to pause disbursements until everything is clarified, very sorry. Then a mid-sized foundation called. No apology. Reading verbatim the email they were about to send. Due to reputational crisis, we need to reassess brand alignment. I heard the word brand and wanted to laugh. How do you package a correctly taken pulse into a logo frame and stamp it safe? Next came a reporter by email. An internal source says you act autocratically with vendors. Comment. When we need gauze and syringes on time, we demand on time. On the other end, they recorded my voice to splice it into a line that fits a headline. That night, I didn't go home. I drove to the seaport, turned the lock on the old loft I'd rented when I first came to Boston. High ceilings, raw brick walls, big windows over the harbor. Only a rolled mattress in the closet, the old wooden table, and a floor lamp remained. In that emptiness, I felt lighter, like shrugging off a wet coat. I opened the window. A salty wind blew in. Then I went to work, building a clean room. I'd brought a new laptop from the office. Backup equipment bought with a grant for teaching students. Broke the seal, powered it on, and immediately turned everything off. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no syncing. I slipped my phone into a signal-blocking pouch and set it on a shelf. On the table, I laid out a hardback notebook, a fountain pen, a stack of multicolored sticky notes, and a map of Boston pinned with tacks. In the corner, I set a plastic bin labeled legal. The AG notice, the recording transcribed, the guardianship papers, the email from Frank Miller. Everything here had to be as clean as an operation. No contaminants, no noise. I opened a voice recorder and titled the file, Journal, Eva. My love, today I'm starting to record each day. Not to teach you to hate anyone and not to turn you into evidence in grown-ups' fights. I promise one thing only, I will not make you into evidence. If someday you need to know anything, you'll hear it straight from my voice. The voice of the person who teaches you to draw the cello bow with steady breath, not a cut-and-paste voice on a tape someone brings. I'm also recording for myself so that whenever my heart beats fast from anger or sorrow, I remember the heartbeat of this city is slow and steady. And I will follow that beat. The next morning, I returned to Dorchester at exactly 7 a.m. Not to the executive desk. I'd been suspended, but to stand at the front desk, greet each patient, and ask who needed an interpreter, who needed a quiet seat for a headache. The pitying looks had begun to arrive ahead of me. A young mother leaned over to ask, "Are you okay?" I nodded, "I'm okay. After we check your child's oxygen today, we'll book ENT right away." I knew bad news travels faster than a prescription. My job was to let people see this door was still open. Midway through the morning, I went into the small office and logged into the building access system with admin privileges that were still active. The log came up like a track sheet: time column, door column, badge ID column, status column. I scrolled to the recent nights. The line jumped out like a pin. 2:17 a.m., rear door, badge #BC0713, access granted. Bennett's badge. I clicked the camera icon next to the line. The still was grainy, but the man in a knit cap, white-soled sneakers, shoulder tipped slightly to the right was unmistakable. I printed those lines. The paper still smelled of ink. The sheet felt like an X-ray. The bone was broken, but where was the pin that drove through? I circled the timestamps, drew connecting lines in red. No need to press hard. The numbers spoke for themselves. At noon that day, the board held an online meeting with strategic partners to reframe the brand. Helena opened, repeating, "Protect the organization," like a mantra. I listened while watching the thumbnail grid of faces on the side screen. The hospital PR, a young attorney, a mid-size foundation rep, and Frank Miller. He wore a V-neck under a jacket, face lit by the webcam, a measured smile, his gaze lowered slightly as if making room for others to speak. He waited for PR to finish, then added, "We don't have an operational problem. We have a narrative problem. I propose creating an independent trust to manage real estate assets so purpose can't be misinterpreted, and appointing a temporary face of transition, while Dr. Hale gives herself time to rest and recover. When the storm passes, the brand will be clean." At that, Helena looked over at my tile. "Dorothy?" I unmuted. "Patients don't wait for a clean brand. They need doctors in the clinic this week." Frank chuckled softly. Through the headphones it sounded like a blade flicked against the rim of a crystal glass. "And that's exactly why we must avoid further theatrics. This is the time to put away our egos to preserve our we." He smiled a little more, just enough to make it sound like kind advice. That timbre made me sit up straight. The laugh brushed a dusty drawer in memory. A main porch, wind whistling, and a man leaning on a post, giving a short chuckle after every line that seemed like a joke. Not the content. The small metallic tail at the end of the syllable, like someone biting a shell and spitting out a shard. I replayed it in my head to be sure. It couldn't be coincidence. I stepped off camera and went to the cracked open window. Cold air slid down my collar. I said nothing more in the meeting, letting that laugh lie under my skin like a shard of broken ice. By afternoon, the withdrawal calls came faster. A large New England foundation emailed a pause indefinitely. An individual donor texted that, "The family doesn't want our name next to controversy." I replied with thanks, kept it brief and polite, while in my mind specific patients flickered. And Rosa with her basket of apples. Mr. Thomas punching his glucose meter. Little Naomi grinning when Alma pressed on a star sticker bandage. What people were pulling wasn't a logo off a wall. They were pulling minutes that real people needed. I made a very short call to Aunt Lee. She listened as I read the access log, stayed silent until the end, then said, "Keep the printout, take pictures, file it." About the laugh. "Don't believe it, but don't ignore it. Put it in the drawer labeled, undeveloped image." I laughed in my throat at her metaphor. "Okay. I won't show anyone this picture while it's still wet." "Good. And eat something," she added, ending the call with a kind of spare, heavy love. It was late. On the street below, someone's running footsteps sounded thin and far. I went back to the table, looked at the tidy papers, the computer sealed off from the world, the old stethoscope resting under the lamp. None of them spoke human words, but if I put my ear close, I could hear small signals. The cold paper of the suspension decision, the warmth of a patient's hand laid on mine, and a metallic tale of laughter touching an old corner of memory. I didn't rush to string them into sentences. I let them lie side by side like three pieces of a map. Then I turned off the light, let the city breathe steadily outside and my heart breathe steadily inside. Tomorrow morning I would be back in the waiting room, greeting each person by name. And this part, the part of thin ice, of the log at 2:17 a.m. and of old laughs wearing new names, I would keep in the clean room until I could call each piece by its right name. I set the meeting for a windy afternoon in the seaport. The loft's high ceiling, old brick walls, windows straight onto the water. I shut down every connection, put my phone in the signal blocking pouch and set the brand new laptop on the table. When Lee Hale, Renee Park, Marcus Doyle and Alma Ruiz were seated around the wooden table, I spoke slowly, like instructing each stroke of a scalpel in an operation. From now on, everything travels on two roads, paper and voice. There is no third road. Aunt Lee, hair streaked with gray, eyes clear like water after fog, nodded first. Tell it in chronological order, she said, opening a leather notebook. I laid out the pieces one by one. First, preserve the evidence, Aunt Lee summed up. Then the timeline. After that, mark the leaks. And finally, the legal path for the long haul. Don't get dragged into a quick-strike stance. She spoke as if reciting an oath of the trade, underlining each line with a blue ink pen. I pulled over a file box and took out 3 stapled packets. Canary docs, I said. Each one looks real, but is harmless, each with a different watermark. I slid version A to her, an internal memo on extending the roof lease for the Dorchester site. Response term 37 days. Version B for Helena, a temporary insurance rider appendix for East Boston, adding the line contingency support for temporary relocation, keeping the Oxford comma. Version C for Ivan Graham, accounting a trial depreciation adjustment table for next quarter, rounding to 38,000 instead of 38,005. Alma frowned. If they take screenshots, will the marks remain? Renee smiled and pushed up her glasses. They will. I've layered 2 kinds of watermarks, a micro layer in line spacing and pixel clusters, and a language layer. Each version has a distinct phrase. Whatever team touches it, I'll be able to read their fingerprints. Marcus set a small black box on the table, its light blinking. Signal detector. Tomorrow I'll go to Dorchester. Alma will call a clock repair to check the thing that goes click on the wall. I'll pull the card, clone the images and check whether there's a stream going out. The logs at 2:17 a.m. and 2:45 a.m. show an override, only possible from the console or a device pressed right up to the reader. We need a photo of the reader to see if there are signs of tampering. I opened another folder, the bylaws I had drafted in the early days. My fingertip touched the paper's edge, recalling the night I hung my mother's stethoscope on the wall and wrote this line. I built in a fuse, I told them. Purpose lock. Aunt Lee leaned in and I slid over the addendum. The print was small and dense but clear. If the board approves a transaction that violates the registered community purpose, the real estate assets automatically transfer to the Boston Community Land Trust under a recorded reverter agreement. You put it in before you ever needed it, she said softly. But the fuse has to be intact. The reverter must be notarized, the land trust must remain authorized to receive, and no one must have amended it since. She stood. I'll verify the originals this afternoon. And get a confirmation letter from the land trust. Renee opened an offline laptop and brought up colorful graphs like an embroidered tapestry. About the deep fake, she said, it sounds right. Only when you look do you see it isn't. She pulled up a MEL spectrogram of my voice from an internal video last month. This is the real voice print. Stable format bands and the vinyl-tiled conference room gives a rounded room tone. She switched to the accusatory tape. And here at Sign It. The formants break. There's a sharp reverb from drywall. Mid-sentence there's a pop from a sealed room mic spliced in. 2 rooms fused together. The voice is constructed. I looked at the color bands like mountain ridges. Even a layperson like me could see the rough seam. Alma exhaled as if dropping a stone from her pocket. So it isn't you. I squeezed her hand. It isn't. But what matters is proving it so everyone can see. Marcus made a note in his book. I need 15 minutes in your office. Alma will use the pretext of changing the clock battery. I'll arrive as an electrician. Alma nodded, as confident as walking into a tough injection. Let me talk to security. And the Canary docs, Aunt Lee prompted. How do we send them so the trace is clear? I said, Bennett gets his via his personal email, since he often helps me coordinate contractors. B. Helena gets a hand-delivered printout, sealed in an envelope with Alma happening to pass the assistant's office. C. Ivan receives his through the accounting channel, CC'd to a single-use inbox I've just created. Renee added, I'll image each version before sending so we can compare if they're scanned out there. We agreed on operating discipline. Each person keeps a notebook. No photos. Papers move in sealed envelopes. Urgent contact via the landline at the cafe downstairs. 2 short rings, 1 long. Marcus grinned. Old school but clean. The next morning, Dorchester woke to a thin mist. Alma arrived early with a battery change kit. The clock's click is startling patience, she told security, half joking, half not. 15 minutes later, Marcus showed up in an electrician's jacket. I stood at the counter, greeted patients by name, and watched their reflections in the glass. In my office, Alma carefully took the clock off the wall. The face was smooth, the second hand ticking in jerks, the faux mechanical kind. Marcus eased off the back. A small black lens appeared. He murmured, There's a microSD card in here. He placed it in an anti-static case, pulled the power lead, quickly checked the power jack. There's a mic too. There may be a stream after hours. Alma replaced the casing, hung the clock back exactly where it had been, her face calm as if she'd never touched it. 5 minutes later, Marcus passed the counter, set a thin envelope on my desk, and turned down the hall. I saw an elderly woman for a glucose check, my hands remembering how to cradle the meter close to an elder's elbow so they wouldn't feel cold. At noon, Renee went to Roxbury under the pretext of checking the number calling speaker. She set up a reference mic in the tiled hallway, captured the room print for 5 minutes, then left. In the afternoon, holding the newly printed Mel spectrogram, she set it beside the one from My Voice on the accusatory tape. It doesn't match, she said, the tip of her pen indicating the noise floor. If they claim the call took place in our conference room, this is the marker that says otherwise. Aunt Lee had been at the Registry of Deeds since early morning. In the afternoon she stepped into the loft, her coat still carrying the scent of old paper, and set the file folder on the table as if placing fragile porcelain. Your reverter has been recorded with a seal, she said. Here is the confirmation letter from the Boston Community Land Trust. When the trigger condition occurs, they will accept. The fuse is intact. Thank you, Auntie. She smiled lightly. Thank you for thinking of today back then. That evening we sat around the table. Marcus slotted the microSD card into an offline reader. Folders by date and time appeared on the screen. He opened a short clip. My office in a wide-angle pale yellow light. At night, the door flicked on. A figure in a knit cap entered. A tilted shoulder, a hand in thin gloves. The face wasn't clear, but the stance was familiar. Marcus stopped it immediately. We've seen enough to identify the movement pattern. The rest goes to Lee to determine what counts as evidence. Renee laid 2 charts in front of her. This is the technical proof, a spliced recording. I can write a report that even a jury will understand. She nodded and wrote it under to file with the court. Alma quickly recounted the clock, and the hospital PR who sent it in. Aunt Lee circled the detail in red. Who signed for it? Need documentation. As for me, it was time to send the Canary docs. Version A went to Bennett via his personal email, with a short line from me. Please review for the roofing contractor. Version B was printed, sealed by Alma in an envelope, and carried past Helena's assistant's office like a thank you card. Version C went to Ivan through the accounting channel, CC'd to the single-use inbox. I checked the time. With the 3 canaries released, the rest was waiting to see where the feathers fell. Before everyone left, I turned on the recorder and spoke a short piece for Eva. Today I formed a small team, I said, my voice steady. Each person holds a position. Aunt Lee holds the law, Renee holds the sound, Marcus holds the doors, Alma holds the people. I hold the tempo. When someone plays the wrong note, the string section doesn't walk off. They keep time for one another. I turned it off and looked at my mother's stethoscope resting on the table. Outside the frame of the window, dark water lapped lightly in the wind. Inside, the papers lay flat, drying. We hadn't beaten anyone and we hadn't lost to anyone. But the rhythm was back in place. At this age, sometimes that alone is enough to get through a long night. On the morning of the guardianship hearing, Boston was damp and cold. Aunt Lee and I arrived early and sat on the wooden benches outside the courtroom. She handed me a paper cup of coffee and murmured, "Keep the tempo." I nodded, trying to keep my heart as flat as the stainless tray in the intake room. Bennett walked in with his attorney wearing a safe tie. He glanced at me, his ready-made smile carrying the message, "I'm here for your own good." I turned toward Aunt Lee. "Just tell the truth," she reminded me. The judge, a woman a little over 50, was concise. "We are hearing the petition for temporary guardianship of Dorothy Hale." Petitioner, proceed. Bennett's attorney read smoothly that I was debilitated, sleepless, impulsive with staff and partners, that I was at the center of the Attorney General's investigation, that for the benefit of the minor, Eva Bennett should be appointed temporary guardian with authority over medical and financial decisions. "Any witnesses?" the judge asked. "Yes, psychologist Gregory Waller." Waller began, "Over 3 months, based on conversations with family and staff, I assess that Ms. Hale has an anxiety disorder, poor sleep, and makes imprudent decisions. She should rest and turn management over to a relative." His voice was even and cold. Aunt Lee rose. "Doctor, have you examined Ms. Hale in person?" "I had a 15-minute call." "What standardized tools did you use?" "Not a full set." "You know the petitioner's mother-in-law through church and were paid for this evaluation?" "Yes." Aunt Lee turned to the judge. "We ask the court to note the limitations and conflicts in this opinion." Bennett's attorney objected to attacking the witness. The judge waved a hand. "Noted. Continue." Aunt Lee changed tack. "Have you reviewed the quality reports for the 3 community health sites Ms. Hale runs? Have you read the commendation from the teaching hospital 6 months ago, signed by Dr. Helena Marlowe, evaluating her as having excellent administrative capacity?" Waller was silent. She set an envelope down. "Please enter into the record." When it was Bennett's turn, his attorney called him to the stand. "An example of impulsivity?" "She met a funder without authorization, worked until 3 a.m., changed the file cabinet lock." Aunt Lee switched on the mic. "At 2:17 a.m. on the 12th, your batch BC0713 opened the rear door at the Dorchester site. At 2:45 a.m. there was an override into Ms. Hale's office. Do you confirm?" I was concerned about safety, asked maintenance to help." "Name of the maintenance person?" "I don't remember." Aunt Lee looked not at Bennett but at the judge. "We have the logs and stills. We moved to file them." Bennett's attorney shook his head. "Outside the scope." The judge noted, "Concerning safety and capacity, the court needs to know." Aunt called Alma Ruiz. She stood straight, hands clasped but voice steady. "I've worked with her for 10 years. She is patient with the panicked, firm when a supplier short delivers syringes. The only impulsivity is giving an extra 5 minutes so an elder can finish a sentence." The courtroom went quiet for a beat. Bennett's attorney asked to replay the recording. The line "Sign it" rang out, a few heads tilted. Aunt Lee pulled out 2 color printouts. "This is a spectral analysis by Renee Park. Please look at this region. The room noise pattern of room A doesn't match room B. There are formant breaks and a sharp reverb from drywall inserted into the rounded room tone of a vinyl-tiled conference room. That means it's spliced. High likelihood this is a deep fake." She avoided fussy jargon, pointing the judge only to what needed seeing. The judge examined closely and nodded slightly. "Noted." Finally, Aunt set on the table a commendation letter signed by Helena. And Hale maintains steady tempo, establishes rigorous quality control procedures, and demonstrates leadership in crisis. Bennett's attorney said, "The context has changed." Aunt replied, "But a person doesn't change overnight." The judge laced her fingers and spoke clearly. "The court will not appoint a temporary guardian today. An independent evaluation is required by a court-appointed physician. Pending that, Hale will not transfer assets outside ordinary operations. Mr. Cross will not access Ms. Hale's personal accounts or the minor child's accounts. Neither party will involve the minor in disputes. Reconvene in 14 days. The gavel struck, dry and crisp. I exhaled, my chest lightening by half a beat. Out in the corridor, footsteps, paper, and coughs were wrapped in stone walls. Aunt Lee gathered the files. No win, no loss. What matters is you're not handcuffed. I nodded. Bennett's mother passed by, flicked a glance. I avoided it. By the window corner, Helena stood holding a thin folder. Backlit, her face was hard to read. I walked over. Are you okay? Helena asked. I am. You saw the audio analysis. Then you know it was constructed. Helena didn't answer directly. If you're right, let me pull you into the light. The sentence hung like a coat hook in midair. I asked plainly, where are you in all this? She looked out the window frame, voice even, in a position where I can do what's right. Not every right thing can be done publicly right away. I kept my eyes on her face. You're asking me to trust a vague line. Vagueness is the needed wrapping to get through this tangle without being strangled on the first rung. Then she lowered her voice. Wednesday, 7:15 a.m. Don't bring a phone. Aunt Lee came up and laid a hand on my shoulder. I don't like vagueness, she said, but sometimes it's a shelter. We keep the tempo and verify each thing. In the afternoon, back at the loft, I opened the clean room, set my mother's stethoscope beside the file folder. I recorded a journal note for Eva. Today, people wanted to decide on your mother's behalf. The court didn't allow it. A doctor who has never met me said I'm not well. Aunt Lee asked whether he had ever sat in our waiting room. He said no. I'm not angry. I'm only sad for the chairs he's never sat in. I also met MS. Helena. She said if I'm right, she'll pull me into the light. Light doesn't always come from a ceiling lamp. It comes from someone opening the window at the right moment. The Save Harbor North Gala night was held in a glass hall overlooking the seaport. Signs blazed, harbor blue ribbons hung everywhere. The board sat at a long table center stage with a stack of clipped documents in front. A memorandum of understanding with the North Ark Foundation. The MC sped through for the community lines and the hall applauded politely. On the right, Bennett adjusted his tie. Ivan Graham held a glass of wine and avoided my eyes. Frank Miller sat in the middle, with the calm of a benefactor about to rescue. I waited behind the curtain, feeling my heartbeat sync with the city's, slow, steady. When the MC invited the chair to sign, Helena rose and took the mic. Before we sign, she said, we've invited an independent technical report to ensure transparency. I looked toward the sound booth. Renee gave a slight nod. Beside her, Jules, the person Marcus had called in to help, set an audio analysis device on the table, cables already plugged into the big screen. Jules stepped out, voice even. You've all heard the tape of Dorothy's voice forcing a counterpart to sign a contract. Here is the waveform analysis. 2 color bands appeared on the screen. Left is the real voice, taken from an internal meeting 3 months ago. Right is the circulating tape. He zoomed in on the sign it segment. Look at this format track. On the real one, the acoustic grain is continuous. On the other, there's a break and a sharp layer of reverb from drywall, which doesn't match the rounded grain of a vinyl-tiled conference room. Which means, he paused a beat. This is a splice. They used an old recording library to reconstruct the voice and dropped it onto a different room bed. Human ears may miss it, but the science sees it. The hall murmured. I met Bennett's eyes. He gave a thin smile, lips pressed as if this too would wash away under PR surf. Helena didn't let the crowd drift. Thank you, she nodded, then signaled. The screen switched to a new chart. Cash flows in red and green like river channels. Marcus's voice came from tech. This is the past 6 months of cash flow, pulled from the ledger provided by accounting. A red line split from ordinary operating expenses and flowed into a name, Bayview Consulting LLC. Business lookup shows Bayview is registered in Delaware, with Caleb Cross as the ultimate beneficiary, a relative on MS. Hale's husband sighed. A thin arrow pointed to the next column. From Bayview, funds moved to accounts under North Ark Partners, a subsidiary LLC serving the North Ark Foundation. Marcus changed the slide. This part relies on the Canary Docks, the decoy materials. 19 minutes later, the phrase, 37 days appeared in an email from Northark's legal counsel attaching negotiation materials. The watermark matches. That afternoon, 38,000 appeared in Bayview's budget table. Same fingerprint, in font and line spacing. He paused, letting the room see each arrow stitched to the next. Conclusion. Internal data leaked from the husband's family side and from accounting. The money ran through a shell and circled back to the table tonight. Ivan shot to his feet, voice cracking. Fabrication. Marcus stayed calm. We will submit file hashes and original logs to investigators. Ivan's eyes flicked to Bennett, a glance long enough for the room to register. I just want to say one line about purpose, I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice level. Harbor North was born to heal small things that carry heavy weight. A pill taken on time, an hour of someone listening. I turned to Helena. If tonight you sign away assets to a fund whose use charter doesn't guarantee a community purpose, who guarantees the weakest voices still have a place to be heard? Ant stood holding a thin folder. I am Lee Hale, attorney. 6 years ago, we filed with the Attorney General's office an addendum to the bylaws called the Purpose Lock. She stepped up, opening the folder for a camera close-up. The clause states, if the board approves any transfer/encumbrance contrary to the registered core community purpose, all Harbor North real estate will automatically transfer to the Boston Community Land Trust under the recorded reverter. No further signatures required. She paused, letting the last line fall clean. In short, if you sign here tonight, the assets will not go to Northark, nor to anyone in this room. They will go straight to the land trust, where no one holds private title. The hall shifted from murmurs to dead quiet. I heard a spoon click softly against a glass at the back table. To the left, a small donor whispered, a reverter? Lee raised another sheet. This is the land trust's confirmation of acceptance. And this is the stamped recordation. The fuse is intact. Bennett leaned in to whisper to his lawyer, mouth set. Frank Miller remained quiet, fingers tapping the chair rail, eyes weighing another option. I turned fully toward him. Mr. Miller, I said, would you like to say a few words before someone signs something that will have no effect? He smiled and stepped into the light. That was when the cheekbone scar rose, a fine curve tugging the right corner of his mouth, like someone once nicked by a shard of glass and self-stitched at a kitchen table. My memory sprang up like an old spring. A main porch, the smell of machine oil, a laugh with a metallic tail. I heard myself speak the old name, voice low as if struck from the chest. Arthur. He halted half a step. A wave of whispers swept the room. Bennett snapped around, eyes bulging for a heartbeat before resetting. Ivan stammered, Frank. I took another step. You left when I was 16. A blizzard night, torn heel boots left on the porch. This scar, I pointed. She once bandaged it with cloth tape. Arthur adjusted his tie. Names, he said softly, are sometimes how people repackage their mistakes. Helena didn't let the shock linger. She took a tiny mic from her pocket and switched it on. I am Helena Marlowe, she said clearly, and for the past 3 months I have cooperated with the FBI at the request of the Attorney General's office. He held up the mic, the lights flashing on metal. All meetings related to Northark, Bayview, and tonight's negotiations have been recorded and transmitted. Among them are exchanges between Bennett Cross, Arthur, also known as Frank Miller, and Ivan Graham about a plan to seize Harbor North's assets via a shell company and a sham rescue deal. The ultimate goal, she looked straight into the camera lens, was to move the assets outside a community purpose. The hall doors swung open at once. Dark blue coats walked in, courteous but firm. One held up a badge, Federal Bureau of Investigation. A female agent stepped forward, voice clear. We have a warrant. Ivan Graham, Bennett Cross, please come with us to answer questions regarding financial fraud and conspiracy to misappropriate assets. Ivan backed up, chin trembling. Bennett tried to say something about a misunderstanding, but his voice caught. 2 other agents moved toward Frank. Arthur. He looked at me for a long beat, as if searching for a shard of the lakeside in my eyes from back then. No shard remained whole. He let his hands go, allowing them to lead him away. I turned back to the mic. Our patients will still come in tomorrow morning. And no matter what anyone signs tonight, the purpose lock speaks for me. Where the assets go depends on the purpose we choose. The lights softened. The blue ribbons still hung. In a corner, Alma wiped a quick drop at the corner of her eye and smiled at me. Renee powered down the device, coiling the cable as neatly as a score ending on the right beat. Marcus slipped his hands into his pockets, looked at the black screen returning his reflection and exhaled. Aunt Lee closed the folder, her hand on its edge like setting the lid on a music box. The safety catch engaged and no one could wind it backward. And somewhere beyond the glass, harbor water kept lapping, as if it had never learned the names that just fell. The weeks after triggering the purpose lock weren't as loud as gala night, but each day there was a small click of joints set back into place. I began by changing the organization's legal spine. Harbor North converted to a public benefit corporation, PBC. The filings were as thick as a winter, but the meaning was simple. The community benefit purpose is written into the charter, forcing every board decision, now or later, to be weighed against patient interest before the numbers. Helena agreed to serve as pro bono legal counsel, reading each clause like someone tuning strings. Slow, sure, leaving nothing out. We formed a patient council. 11 chairs around the wooden table at the Dorchester site. The 12th chair is always left empty, for the person coming in for the first time. The bylaws state clearly, the council has partial veto power over changes that directly affect access to care, hours of operation, service fees, language programs, referral pathways. The veto isn't to slam the brakes, but to keep time. At the first sessions, Rosa set a basket of apples in the middle of the table. If you plan to move Thursday evening hours, remember we work second shift. Move them and we can't make it. Alma smiled. Then we keep them. A small clause was written. Renee rebuilt the data system like building a house with a storm cellar. The primary server in Roxbury, an offline backup cluster placed in the clean room on a dedicated line. All sensitive access sends canary signals to the log. Every policy change requires 2 signatures. Operations and a patient council representative. If someone hits the wrong thing, Renee said, pointing at the diagram, this light comes on and the system pulls the plug itself, switching to island mode. I laughed. Island here doesn't mean hiding, it means keeping the weakest people's data from being flung out into the street. From legal structure and data, I thought about seats. The Northlight Institute. A classroom in Roxbury, a few whiteboards, 6 chairs, a projector better than I first imagined. The goal? To train community health administration for those who will carry it on. Coordinators, head nurses, managers of small clinics in neighborhoods with few privileges. Renee is in charge of data security. She teaches how to spot phishing and how to explain privacy to an elderly woman who doesn't use email. Alma oversees nursing practice. She demonstrates an injection that is both swift and warm, and teaches the phrase, "May I touch your hand," in 3 languages. At the final session of each course, I stand in the back and listen to a new intern read aloud. "We will not run faster than a patient's heart," the motto hung at the door. My home with Eva moved to Jamaica Plain. A wood house with a small porch facing a row of maples, a 10-minute walk from Jamaica Pond. On weekends, the 2 of us wear wide-brim hats and turn a narrow strip of soil to plant rosemary, cherry tomatoes, and a few shiso clumps from seeds Alma gave us. Eva stuck a wooden label in, Plot E. I laughed. E for Eva? She shook her head. E for enough. I am learning how to understand enough. On Sunday afternoons, we bike through the arboretum. When we get home, she plays a few cello notes, and I cut rosemary leaves to set on a tray of candles. Sometimes I even switch on the voice recorder for a while and speak a few simple lines into it for the audio journal. Today the soil was soft. You laughed when the neighbor's cat slept in the mint pot. Bennett appeared in our new life in a different form. Community service at the clinic as ordered by the court, plus a debt recovery course, a class in financial counseling and routine expense management. On the first day he came to Dorchester in a gray coat. Bending to pick up appointment slips the wind had blown onto the steps. I assigned the work. Shelf 3 needs the gauze restocked by code. The list is here. At noon he stood at the sink washing each stainless tray. I kept the boundary like a fine line on a hospital floor. Everyone can cross it but no one gets to erase it. A few weeks later, Eva met her father in the clinic hallway. She stopped short and looked at me. I said gently, "Say hi to Dad and head to school." She turned, "Hi, Dad." Bennett forced a smile. "Hi, kiddo." I waited till she was out of sight before I looked at him. This is where patients come, and it's also where you learn. Keep those two things clear. The patient council held its third session on the proposal to shift some Thursday evening hours to Saturday morning. Thomas the mechanic said, "Saturday mornings I go to the low-cost market and I don't have a car." A young mother from Cabo Verde said, "On Thursday evenings I can finally get my sister to watch the baby." Helena sat at the far end taking notes, not steering. When it came to a vote, the council partially vetoed. Keep Thursday evenings as they are and add a rotating Saturday morning block for elders. I initialed the minutes. Glad the way you are when a helm turns by a small angle and the boat changes course. At Northlight, the first cohort graduated in a room strung with paper pennants Alma had cut. Renee handed out certificates with a parting line, "Don't let security make people go silent. Good security lets people dare to speak honestly." One student, a young Haitian nurse, came up and hugged me. "I'm going back to Mattapan to open a weekend blood pressure counseling room. Will you come cut the ribbon?" I said, "Don't invite me. Invite your neighborhood patient council." In the evening, Eva and I walked out to Center Street. She ducked into the used bookstore. I stopped by the garden shop for another hand trowel. A neighbor asked, "Are you Dorothy from Harbor North?" I hesitated a little. She smiled kindly, "Thank you for keeping the evening hours. I watch my grandchild during the day." One simple sentence was enough to warm the whole block. At night, Helena dropped by the loft with a set of documents. The PBC charter has been approved by the AG. The patient council veto stays in. Just note, each use must be transparent. We sat by the window looking down at the dark water. "Are you tired?" I asked. She shook her head, tired just enough to fall asleep fast. Before she left, she added, "When you force power to look at purpose, it will resist. But then it learns to sit still." I wrote the last notes in my book. Harbor North's new KPIs aren't just visit counts but also the number of times the patient council uses its veto, because each time is a time we listened. I also added a people column. Alma, strong at training for difficult injections. Renee, strong at pulling the plug at the right moment. Helena, strong at saying a small but clear no. Eva, strong at reminding me to water the plants. Late in the day, Bennett finished his service shift and waved from the porch. "I'll have to come back a few more weeks," he said without complaining. I answered, "This door is open for anyone who works. The door to my home opens only for our child." As darkness settled over Jamaica Plain, Eva's cello joined the faraway sound of the trolley. I thought of the people organizing their evening medications, hands twisting syringe caps, reminder calls made in a mother tongue. Harbor North now has a full name: PBC Land Trust Patient Council. Those words are dry on paper, but when they flow into opening hours and a greeting of "Sir, sit here," they become breath. And I, in the small garden by the kitchen, am relearning an old but new skill: keeping the tempo slow enough so the weakest can keep step. A year later, the seaport wind felt like someone had just eased a door closed to quiet the room. This year's Land Trust Gala was small and warm. A string of yellow lights across the glass hall, a few trays of steaming pastries, name cards on twine. No countdown clock, no gavel for signing. On the back wall hung a newly painted wooden sign: "Property of the Boston Community Land Trust. Leased to Harbor North for community health." Beneath it was a small line proposed by the patient council: "The house is not for sale." I stood beside Alma, watching patients smile at one another like distant relatives meeting after a long time. Rosa had her apple basket as always. "The apples are extra sweet this year, doctor, because the rains came right on time," she said. Thomas wore an old denim jacket and teased, "If the land trust needs anyone to check tire pressure in a hurry, call me." Renee hovered at the sound table, checking the wireless mic for the program, not for speeches but for Eva's cello. She stood behind the curtain in a cool green dress, the instrument resting on her shoulder like a small tree leaning on someone it trusts. I smoothed her hair where it fell down her back. "Which piece did you choose?" She smiled. "The saraband," but I wrote a short transition. I feigned surprise. "Original." She winked. "I'm just stitching back the places where people usually gasp for breath." I understood the way she names what she feels. When the MC invited, "A small gift from the Harbor North family," the lights softened. Eva stepped out, bowed, and set the bow. The first note rose deep and clear, like the city at 5 a.m. before the bus starts its route. She played through the main section, then into her own transition. A short motif repeated 3 times, each time quieter, like a hand pressed softly over a wound. I heard the room breathe together, no one told to. At the right-hand table, Helena closed her eyes for a few seconds. Aunt Lee looked down at her hands where the fountain pen still lay. Alma pinched the edge of her scarf, eyes damp. When the last note fell, she held the bow in the air for a beat, exactly as I've taught her. Leave a quiet space so everything can settle, and only then did she bow. After her performance, I walked the long table shaking hands and signing a few thank you cards for small donors. Checks not enough for an ultrasound machine, but enough to pay for a Thursday evening shift. At the end of the table, a land trust staffer handed me an unmarked envelope. Left at the reception early, probably for you. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed, the edges a bit frayed. Inside was an old 4x6 photo with a thin white border. Me, an 8-year-old, standing by Sebago Lake, a knit hat over my ears, oversized boots sinking half a foot into wet snow. Behind me the water was dull, the sunset washing a streak of orange. Along the edge, a line in blue fountain pen ink already blurred by water. You deserve more light than your father. The father's handwriting didn't shout. It was quiet, like someone knocking late who knows there's a child asleep inside. I remembered the cheekbone scar at the gala that night, the click of cuffs like a refrigerator door slammed shut. Now, though the sender didn't sign, I knew where that blue ink came from. Perhaps from a wood table in a visiting room, perhaps from a plastic pen someone lent. Perhaps the only apology he knew how to write without asking to be answered. I slipped the photo back into the envelope and put it in my coat pocket. When people gathered around the pastry table, I went to the small storage room in back and opened the memory box I've carried since I left Maine. An old blue cookie tin with chipped paint. Inside were my mother's unfinished letter, a faded hair tie, a creased birth certificate, and a smooth stone from the lakeshore. I placed the photo inside between the tie and the stone. Not burned, not displayed. I wanted it to be housed, not to rule. When I closed the lid, the metal meeting made a short musical note. A point, not a period. Back out front, I saw Eva talking with Aunt Lee and Helena. She handed me a cup of hot cocoa and asked softly, "Are you okay? Did something happen?" I hesitated for a second, long enough for the truth to find its footing, and said, "Do you want to go to Maine this weekend? We'll set a wooden sign where I used to wait." Eva smiled, her eyes bright as harbor lights. "What will it say?" I answered, "If you're tired as you pass, stop and listen to your own breath." She burst out laughing. "Too long." Then shorter. "Sit for a while," I said, picturing the sign on the old porch, the lake wind threading through the boards. The gala ended with a short speech by the Land Trust. No grand promises, just a list of small things already done. A leaky roof in East Boston was replaced, a row of chairs with backs swapped in for plastic ones in Dorchester, a cabinet of translated materials in Haitian Creole and Cabo Verdean set up in Roxbury. Sentence like a stitch. I listened and saw faces in my mind. An elderly woman in a knit cap, a mechanic with chapped hands, a little boy whose sneeze sounded like a sparrow. Safety is not always a high wall. It is appointments kept on time, doors that aren't locked, and papers translated to mean what they say. When the last person left and the glass hall thinned out, the sea wind returned as background music. Before putting her cello away, Eva asked for one more note. She drew a long open string, an A like a line stretched across the water. I stood by the frame and watched the dark harbor, the moored boats rocking lightly. In the glass, our 2 silhouettes overlapped with the lights, blurring and then sharpening again. Helena stepped up and touched my elbow lightly. "Heading to Maine tomorrow?" I nodded. "Send a greeting from me to the porch." Aunt Lee stood behind, holding up her fountain pen like a small candle. "And leave a bit of space, so someone late can know where to stand." I smiled and nodded. Alma pulled her coat up to her neck and whispered, "I'm sending some butter cookies with you. It's cold." Renee locked the sound cabinet and flicked the switch. Lights off, Data asleep. We picked up the abandoned paper cups and wiped the water rings on the table. Eva hugged her instrument and looked up. "Mom, next time can I write a new transition?" I rubbed her shoulder. "Write all you like. Just remember to leave room to breathe." She nodded as if she understood an unwritten rule of my whole life. Before sliding the glass door shut, I stood one more minute. Outside, the seaport breathed steadily. The salty wind carried the faint metallic smell of the pier, the damp wood of the boards, and the lingering scent of apple tarts on the cloth. I thought of the photo in the box, of the smudged line. You deserve more light than your father. Light isn't a tourmaline star or CNN lights. It's the habit of opening a window each morning, not selling a community house for a round of applause, bringing a cello into a clinic so patients can hear a saraband on Thursday nights. I spoke loud enough to hear myself and soft enough that the wind wouldn't carry it off. They used power to silence me. I used truth to make the city safe. After I said it, I inhaled for 4, held for 2, exhaled for 6. Eva's still vibrated in the air like a filament for light. I locked the door. In my coat pocket, the envelope lay quietly, not demanding noise, only asking for a decent seat among the things I've chosen to keep. And I knew that this weekend, on a wooden sign at Sebago Lake, there would be a place for the tired to stop and listen to their own breath. That too is how a city learns safety from the smallest things. If you were me, would you choose differently? Keep ownership or lock the house into a place no one can ever sell? Would you forgive Arthur when that smudged ink line arrived late? And with Bennett, where is the boundary that is enough to be both fair and kind? I'd really like to hear your view. What in this story resonates with your own experience of family, justice, and healing? Leave a comment below, even just a very short line. What would I write on the wooden sign at Sebago? Small thoughts always help us see a safer city, starting with how we listen to one another. If you feel in tune with this journey, don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next stories about my and my daughter's life in Jamaica Plain, Thursday night cello in the waiting room, Northlights first class, or the return to Maine to set the sit for a while sign. Thank you for staying with me to the final note. See you at the next opening note.